Hey guys, welcome to 8.1 Energy and Life Notes. We are talking about ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. It's a very important molecule when we're talking about life. So let's talk about why that is. So first, we're going to go to the basics, energy. We get two things from our food. Let's go way back to the beginning of the year. So we know by now that we get both energy and nutrients in our food. And we know that we can recycle our elements and they're used over and over and over and over again. However, with energy, it's a little bit different. Energy is converted and it can be converted again and again. And every time it's converted, it becomes a little bit less organized until we lose it as heat to the universe. And so, but it doesn't disappear. It never disappears. It just goes into the universe. So we get energy and nutrients from our food. Today we're going to be talking about energy. Let's follow the path of energy. Where does it come from and where does it go? So light energy comes from the sun and it is trapped in the bonds of glucose through the process of photosynthesis. You guys all know this. So here's our sun and the light energy here is trapped in the bonds of glucose, and we call this chemical energy because it is within a chemical. It is in the bonds of glucose. And at that point, once it's chemical energy, we can eat it. It's a very organized form of energy. And so organisms that make their own food with the energy from the sun, or organisms that can photosynthesize, we call those autotrophs. And if we look at the prefix auto means self. And so that means that the plants, or the autotrophs, are making their foods themselves. So they're getting the energy from the sun and trapping it in their own food. Autotrophs. The other word that we're talking about is organisms that eat plants, that eat autotrophs, or eat other things that eat autotrophs. So if we look here, here's our autotroph, and then here's the thing that's eating our autotroph. And we would call that a heterotroph. A heterotroph is something that eats something else. So the prefix hetero means other. And so here, this is eating another organism. So here we can have this organism, this heterotroph, is eating the plant. And if somebody were to hunt this moose and eat the moose, well, they'd also be a heterotroph because they're eating the thing that ate the autotroph. And so we people, we heterotrophs, eat the glucose that the plants made. That's how we get our energy. And we break those bonds of glucose down and we get energy from that glucose in the process of digestion. So glucose is an awesome molecule. It is great. And it is a big, stable molecule. And it's great for transporting energy around your body. It travels through your bloodstream and it doesn't break down. We eat it, we digest it, it goes into our bloodstream and it moves all around our body and it doesn't break down. The bonds aren't broken then. What happens is that we need to change this into another molecule that's more usable because glucose is hard to break down. It's hard to break once it's in this form of glucose right here, once it's in this single sugar, it's hard to break that down and to get energy out of it. And so what we do is we have to convert. We take the energy in one glucose and we convert it into a new molecule of ATP, something different. And so our cells need energy to fuel cellular processes. Let me move this picture right here. Let me move this picture right here. Actually, I can make it smaller. There we go. And so if you remember, we talked about protein pumps. Let me grab a pen here. And I will draw in some red dots. And let's say that we have some molecules inside. We're going to have an area of higher concentration on the inside. And you guys all already know that areas of higher concentration the molecules are going to move to areas of lower concentration. And this happens without the input of energy. This happens because molecules are always just moving around and bumping around. And so let's say that there's a molecule out here But this is going to be going, and let's say that this is a glucose molecule, and it needs to go inside the cell so that the cell can have more glucose. But it would be moving against the concentration gradient. It's going to have a tendency, these glucose molecules are going to have a tendency to move out, not in. Will some move in? Sure, but generally the glucose molecules are going to be moving out. And so in this scenario, to move against a concentration gradient, we're going to need a molecule. We're going to need to put energy. Let me grab a different color. Let's use blue. We're going to need to add energy to this pump right here to open it up and to allow this sugar molecule to go into this cell. And that's going to take energy. And that is going to be, that energy that we use is in the form of a molecule called ATP. Another process that uses ATP is going to be like cell division. So here we can see a cell is starting to divide and it becomes two. And so that's a process that's going to need energy in the form of ATP. Anything and everything that needs energy in the cell, all of the processes are going to be using a molecule called ATP. All right, let me turn off the pen so I can switch screen. All right, and I think I'm here. Let's go here. So here we have an ATP, an adenosine triphosphate. And so this sounds like a big word, but it's not scary. So an adenosine triphosphate. Let's look at this. Let me grab my pen again, and we're going to circle this right here. This is a couple pieces, but we're going to call this an adenosine. So these two pieces together are an adenosine. And if we look over here, we have 1, 2, 3 phosphate groups. And a phosphate group is a molecule, as you can see. Let me erase this. As you can see, it has phosphorus in it. And so this right here is a phosphate, this right here is a phosphate, this right here is a phosphate. And so the molecule adenosine triphosphate has 3 phosphates. So look at the prefix tri, adenosine 3 phosphates. And what happens is that these molecules right here, these phosphate groups, they're negatively charged. So let me draw in that negative charge. It is negative, it is negative, and it is negative. And so opposites attract and likes repel. So these 3 phosphates do not want to hang out next to each other. They repel one another. And to have more than 2, to have 3 of them together, that phosphate right here is very unstable. This molecule is very unstable. It is going to lose this phosphate group very easily. And so that bond will break, and it will more easily donate energy to a cellular process than glucose would. And so this right here, when it goes to a cellular process, it's going to donate the phosphate group. It's going to break that bond, and it's going to donate the energy to that process so that that pump will open, or so that the cell can divide. Oh, let me turn off my pen. Oh, here we go. And so to fuel a cellular process, ATP loses a phosphate group. So let's look at this picture right here. Here's our ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. So this right here has di, the prefix di means 2 phosphates, and this is a lower energy molecule. It has already donated its phosphorus, or its phosphate group. So we have this represented here by this partially charged battery. And here's our ATP. It has been recharged, meaning that it has its 3rd phosphate group. And so it is a high energy molecule, meaning that the battery is fully charged. And so this ATP will go to a cellular process, donate the phosphorus, or the phosphate group, and the energy when that bond is broken, and become an ADP, or an adenosine diphosphate. So the low energy ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, is going to go to the mitochondria to get its 3rd phosphate group back, or to have a 3rd phosphate group added on. So here you can see the phosphate group. The ADP goes to the mitochondria and it gets recharged there. And that's why we call the mitochondria, when we're in 7th grade, we call it the powerhouse of the cell, right? Because it fuels the cell, it gives the cell energy. And really what it does in our high school level definition is that it is converting chemical energy from the bonds of glucose to chemical energy in ATP. It's taking the energy from glucose and it is using that energy to add this third phosphate group back onto an ADP. And so for every one glucose molecule, we can refuel or restock 32 ATP, or refuel 32 ADP into 32 ATP. And so this process here, taking that phosphate group and adding it onto an ADP, well, that's called cell respiration, and we're going to talk about that more later. But this is our molecule of ATP. And so to summarize this whole lesson, the energy from the sun is converted into chemical energy in the bonds of glucose through the process of photosynthesis. Then we eat that glucose. So here's the cow eating the grass. And then we eat that glucose and we convert that chemical energy into another form of chemical energy called ATP. We do that because it's more easy to use. Our cells can break that phosphate bond, that bond between the phosphates, a lot more easily than that glucose molecule. That glucose molecule isn't going to break down in the cell to fuel cell processes like that. It's just too stable. And so we use that energy from ATP to move and think. We convert it into kinetic energy, which allows us to move. And so that is the lecture on ATP. Hope that helps.